Thanks to our existing viewers for your love and support. I really appreciate you all. And if you are just viewing us, please do well to like, share, and hit that subscription button. It really means a lot to us. Thanks as you do so. Now let's dive in.
Emma stood outside the courtroom, her judge's robes suddenly feeling like chains. Inside, a criminal waited. At the hospital, a dying man clung to life. Both shared her blood. Both had destroyed her childhood, and she had to decide their fate. The gavel felt heavy in Emma's hand as she made her announcement. Due to medical circumstances involving the defendant's family, this court is postponed for 72 hours. The defendant will remain in custody. Court adjourned. Alexander's lawyers protested loudly, but Emma was already leaving through her chamber doors, her heart pounding against her ribs. She drove home in silence, her mind racing. When she opened the apartment door, she found Sophia and their mother sitting at the kitchen table, untouched tea growing cold between them. The air was thick with unspoken words. "You know," Emma said quietly, dropping her briefcase. Sophia nodded, her doctor's composure cracking. "He's in my ICU, critical condition, massive heart attack with complications." Sarah stared at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors to feed her daughters. "After all these years, fate brings him to you both." "He needs a blood transfusion urgently," Sophia continued, her voice clinical, detached, the only way she could cope. "His type is rare. Without it, he has maybe 48 hours. Emma sat down heavily. "And Alexander?" "Same blood type," Sophia whispered. "I checked the records." The room fell silent. The irony was suffocating. The son Marcus prized above all else might be the only one who could save him. "I need Alexander released temporarily to donate," Sophia said, looking at her sister. "As a judge, you could authorize medical furlough for—" "No," Emma's voice was steel. "He killed someone, Sophia, a mother, left her children screaming on the pavement." Sarah reached across the table, placing her weathered hand over Emma's. "I know what he did to us. I know the pain. But you became a judge to uphold justice, not revenge. And justice means saving lives when you can, even lives that don't deserve saving." Emma looked at her mother, the woman who'd forgiven everyone, who'd never let bitterness poison her soul despite having every reason to. "If we let him die without trying," Sarah continued softly, "we become just like him. We choose who deserves to live based on our pain." Sophia pulled out her phone. "There's something else. Victoria is at the police station. She's blocking the medical furlough, claiming Alexander shouldn't risk his health for a dying old man." Emma's eyes widened. What kind of mother refuses to let her son save his father's life?
Victoria stood in the police station wearing diamonds and designer heels, blocking the one thing that could save her husband's life. Her reason? It would make Emma realize that some people aren't worth saving, and some secrets are worth killing for. The police station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Emma arrived in her civilian clothes, Sophia beside her. They'd filed the emergency medical furlough request an hour ago. Victoria sat in the waiting area, perfectly composed, scrolling through her phone as if she were at a spa appointment rather than deciding her husband's fate. "Mrs. Marcus," Emma announced formally, "I'm Judge Martinez. I understand you're objecting to your son's temporary medical release." Victoria looked up slowly, her eyes scanning Emma with calculating coldness. "Judge Martinez," she repeated, tasting the name. "How civic-minded of you to involve yourself in my family's affairs." "Your husband is dying," Sophia interjected, her doctor's urgency breaking through. "Alexander is the only compatible donor immediately available." Victoria stood, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "My son has been through enough trauma. Forcing him to undergo a medical procedure in his fragile mental state? Unthinkable." "He's being charged with vehicular manslaughter, not having a breakdown," Emma said coldly. And the procedure is a simple blood donation that takes 30 minutes. Simple! Victoria's laugh was sharp, bitter. Nothing about this situation is simple, Judge. My husband made his choices. He married me for an heir. He got one. Now he faces the consequences of his investments. Something in her tone made Sophia's skin crawl. The way she said investments dripped with venom. Are you seriously going to let your husband die out of spite? Sophia asked incredulously. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for the sisters. Let me be clear. Alexander will not be donating anything. And if Marcus dies, well, that simply accelerates certain inheritances. Emma's legal mind clicked into place. You want him dead. You're his wife. You'd inherit everything. What's left of everything, you mean, thanks to my son's enthusiasm. But yes, a widow's inheritance is still quite substantial, especially without complicated ex-wives or forgotten children complicating estate claims. She gathered her designer purse. So do what you must, Judge Martinez. Grant your little furlough, but I'll tie it up in legal challenges for days, and by then, well, nature will have taken its course.
As Victoria walked toward the exit, Emma made a decision that would change everything. Officer, she called out, I'm issuing an emergency judicial order. Alexander Marcus is to be transferred immediately to City General Hospital for medical donation under court supervision. Any interference will be considered obstruction of justice. Victoria froze at the door, her mask of composure finally cracking. Alexander shuffled into the hospital room in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, flanked by 2 officers. The man on the bed was supposed to be his father, his legacy, his empire. But the truth, waiting in a blood test vial, would destroy everything he thought he knew. Marcus lay unconscious, machines beeping rhythmically around him. His IV lines snaked into his arms. His once powerful frame looked shrunken, fragile beneath the white hospital sheets. Sarah stood in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself. This was the man who'd thrown her away, yet seeing him like this stirred something she thought she'd buried. Not love, but the ghost of what could have been. Emma and Sophia entered with Alexander between the guards. He looked nothing like the arrogant defendant from the courtroom. His designer confidence had evaporated, replaced by genuine fear. Is he? Alexander's voice cracked. Alive, barely, Sophia answered clinically. We need to run a blood compatibility test first, then proceed with the transfusion if you match. Alexander stared at Marcus. For all his rebellion, all his reckless behavior, he'd never imagined his father vulnerable, dying. Where's Mom? He asked suddenly. The twins exchanged glances. She left, Emma said simply. Left? What do you mean left? Her husband is... She didn't want you to donate, Sophia interrupted, preparing the blood draw kit. She fought against your release. Alexander's face went pale. That's not possible. She wouldn't... Believe what you want, Emma said coldly. Right now, you're here for one reason only. After this, you go back to custody to face justice for what you did. A guard removed one handcuff so Sophia could access Alexander's arm. He winced as the needle pierced his skin, watching his blood fill multiple vials. Sarah moved closer to the bed, looking down at Marcus. After everything, she whispered, it comes down to this. Your son, the heir you treasured, trying to save you while your daughters watch. Sophia took the vials to the lab. The wait felt eternal, 20 minutes that stretched like hours. Emma stood by the window, watching the city lights. Alexander sat handcuffed to a chair, staring at his unconscious father. Sarah remained by Marcus's bedside, her hand hovering over his, but never quite touching. When Sophia returned, her face was ashen white. The blood test is complete, she said, her voice shaking. Everyone turned to her. Alexander, you're not a match. She paused, her hands trembling as she held the lab results. Actually, that's not accurate. You're not a match because... She looked at Alexander, then at Marcus. Because there's a 0% biological probability that Marcus is your father. The room erupted. Alexander lunged forward, restrained by guards. That's impossible. Run it again. You made a mistake. But Sophia's tears said everything. There was no mistake. Marcus's perfect heir wasn't his son at all.
Marcus's eyes fluttered open to a nightmare worse than death. His son wasn't his son. His wife had vanished, and the daughters he'd abandoned were the only ones standing vigil at his bedside. Some men feared dying. Marcus feared living with what he'd done. The shouting had pierced through Marcus's unconsciousness like shards of glass. His eyes opened slowly, the hospital room swimming into focus through a haze of pain and medication. The first thing he saw was Alexander, his heir, in handcuffs and prison orange, screaming at a young doctor who looked eerily familiar. "Run the test again! My mother wouldn't! She couldn't!" Then Marcus saw her, Sarah, standing by his bedside, older, worn by years of struggle, but still beautiful, still dignified, and beside her, two young women who made his heart stop. They had Sarah's eyes, Sarah's strength in their posture, his daughters. "Sarah," his voice came out as a broken whisper. The room went silent. Everyone turned to the bed. Sarah's expression was unreadable, not angry, not pleased, just profoundly sad. "You're awake." Marcus tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his chest. Sophia moved instinctively, the doctor in her overriding everything else. She adjusted his IV, checked his monitors, professional and distant. "Don't move. You've had a massive coronary event. Your heart is severely damaged." You're a doctor?" Marcus whispered, studying her face. "Yes." Sophia's voice was ice. "I'm the daughter you threw away because I wasn't born with the right anatomy. And this," she gestured to Emma, "is the judge presiding over your son's murder trial, the other daughter you discarded." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. The empire he'd built, the legacy he'd obsessed over, and fate had brought his abandoned daughters to hold all the power. "Alexander," he croaked, looking at the young man in handcuffs. "The blood test." Emma stepped forward, her judge's authority evident even in civilian clothes. "Isn't your son. The DNA test was conclusive. Victoria lied to you. She gave you an heir, but not your heir." The machines around Marcus beeped faster as his heart rate spiked. Sophia quickly administered medication to calm him. 23 years, Expanse gasped, each word painful. "I destroyed my family for a son that isn't even mine." "You destroyed your family because you valued male pride over human love," Sarah said quietly. "The test results just revealed what you always were, a man who valued an idea more than real people." Alexander slumped in his chair, the weight of revelation crushing him. "Mom knew. She knew all along, and she let me believe." "Where is Victoria?" Marcus asked weakly. Emma and Sophia exchanged glances. Neither had seen Victoria since she'd stormed out of the police station. "We need to find her," Emma said, pulling out her phone, "because if she was willing to let you die, she's probably—" Her phone buzzed. A message from the court clerk. "Judge Martinez, urgent. Victoria Marcus just withdrew $50 million from joint accounts, multiple property transfers filed this morning." Marcus's empire was being systematically dismantled by the woman he'd married for an heir. Marcus lay dying, his fake heir useless, his empire crumbling, his second wife vanished. Only one person in the world could save him now, the woman he'd destroyed. And she was walking toward the door. "Wait." Sarah's voice cut through the tension as Emma and Sophia prepared to leave. Marcus watched from his bed, hope and shame warring on his face. Alexander sat slumped in his chair, his entire identity shattered in a single blood test. "Mom, no," Emma said firmly, reading her mother's intention. "You can't be thinking. He needs blood. He's going to die without it." Sarah's voice was steady, calm, the same voice that had soothed her daughters through countless hungry nights and cold winters. Sophia shook her head. "His type is rare, but we can find another donor. It might take time, but—"
Time he doesn't have, Sarah interrupted, looking at the monitors. You said so yourself. 48 hours maximum. Marcus's voice was barely audible. Sarah, you don't have to. Don't, Sarah said sharply, finally looking at him directly. Don't thank me, don't apologize, don't say anything. She turned to her daughters, these brilliant young women she'd raised alone. You both became who you are because I taught you that our humanity isn't defined by how others treat us. It's defined by how we treat others when we have the power. He threw us away like garbage. Emma's voice cracked with emotion she rarely showed. He chose a fantasy over his own children, over you. I know, Sarah's eyes glistened, and every day for 23 years I lived with that choice. But if I let him die when I could save him, I become the person who values revenge over mercy, and I didn't raise you to be that person either. Sophia stepped forward, her medical instincts conflicting with her pain. Mom, you're not obligated. I'm not doing this for him, Sarah said quietly. I'm doing this for me, for the woman I choose to be. 2 hours later, Sarah lay on a hospital bed next to Marcus, a transfusion line connecting them, his blood literally flowing from her veins into his. Emma and Sophia stood watching, their emotions tangled, pride in their mother's grace, anger at her sacrifice, confusion about their own feelings. Marcus was conscious now, watching Sarah's face as her blood saved his life. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I don't deserve this. No, Sarah agreed, staring at the ceiling. You don't. When the transfusion was complete, Sarah sat up slowly. Sophia checked her vitals, while Emma stood guard, as if protecting their mother from Marcus's very presence. We're leaving now, Emma announced. Officers, return the prisoner to custody. As the guards led Alexander away, his world destroyed, his mother gone, his father not his father, Marcus reached out weakly. Sarah, girls, please. But they walked out without looking back, their footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. Marcus was alive, but he was utterly, devastatingly alone. 3 days later, he was discharged to an empty mansion and a nightmare he couldn't wake from.
Marcus stood in the doorway of his mansion, expecting luxury and finding devastation. The queen had fled with the crown jewels, and the empire he'd built for a phantom son was now a tomb of broken dreams. The mansion felt wrong the moment Marcus's driver dropped him off. Too quiet, too still. He pushed open the massive front door, his chest still aching from the surgery, his heart broken in ways no doctor could repair. The marble foyer echoed with his footsteps, hollow, empty. "Victoria?" His voice cracked. "Alexander?" Silence answered. Marcus moved through rooms that had once been filled with noise and life, and now felt like a mausoleum. The study, half empty. Victoria's office, completely cleared out. Alexander's room, untouched, frozen in time, like a shrine to a lie. Then he saw it, an envelope on the dining room table, his name written in Victoria's elegant script. His hands trembled as he opened it. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you'll never find me, and your accounts will be considerably lighter. Did you really think I loved you? I married a wallet, not a man. Your obsession with a male heir made you so predictable, so manipulable, it was almost too easy. Alexander isn't yours. He's from a relationship I had before we met, but you were so desperate for a son, so blinded by your pathetic need for legacy, that you never questioned it. You just handed me everything. I've transferred what's left of your liquid assets, sold properties you didn't even know I had access to, and liquidated investments you'd forgotten about. The company Alexander destroyed? That was just the beginning. I've been bleeding you dry for years, moving money into accounts you'll never trace.
You threw away real daughters for a fantasy, you destroyed a good woman for your ego, and you deserved everything that's happened to you. Don't bother looking for me. I'm a ghost now. Enjoy your empty mansion. It's all you have left. Victoria. The letter slipped from Marcus's fingers as his phone began violently buzzing. Alert after alert. Transaction, $15 million withdrawn. Property transfer complete. Coastal estate. Account closure. Investment portfolio. Transaction, $8 million withdrawn. Credit card purchase, $250,000. Marcus collapsed into a chair, watching his empire evaporate in real-time notifications. Victoria had his MasterCards, his account passwords, his trust. She'd been planning this for years. He tried calling his bank, his lawyers, his accountants. Frozen accounts, legal holds, everything tied up in red tape that would take months to unravel, if it could be unraveled at all. The man who'd built a billion-dollar empire couldn't access enough money to buy groceries. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Hope flickered. Maybe Victoria? Maybe a mistake? Maybe... Mr. Marcus? An unfamiliar voice. This is Officer Chen. We need you to come to the courthouse tomorrow. Your son's preliminary hearing has been scheduled. Judge Martinez presiding. Marcus's last chance to see his daughters again would be in a courtroom, watching them deliver justice to a young man who wasn't even his son.
Marcus walked into the courtroom a broken man in a borrowed suit, searching the crowd for any sign of mercy. What he found instead was Judge Emma Martinez's gavel and the cold, perfect justice he'd never believed his daughters could achieve. The courthouse was packed. Media cameras lined the hallways. The case had become a sensation. Billionaire's son facing murder charges, presided over by one of the youngest judges in the city's history. Marcus slipped into the back row, unrecognized in his worn clothing. The suit he wore was from 10 years ago, pulled from the back of a closet because everything else had been taken. He'd lost 30 pounds in 3 weeks. His face was gaunt, aged a decade by stress and regret. Then the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Emma Martinez." Marcus stood, his breath catching as Emma entered. She wore her judicial robes with absolute authority, her face composed, professional, unreadable. This was his daughter, the baby girl he'd rejected for not being a son. She was magnificent. Alexander was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, his arrogance completely stripped away. He looked small, scared, nothing like the spoiled heir who'd crashed through life consequences-free. Marcus scanned the courtroom and found them, Sarah and Sophia, sitting in the third row. Sarah's face was calm but sad. Sophia sat rigid, her doctor's composure barely holding. They didn't look at him, not once. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Witness testimonies, the dashcam footage that made people in the gallery gasp, the toxicology report, the victim's family, a father and 2 children who'd lost a wife and mother, sat weeping in the front row. Alexander's defense attorney argued diminished capacity, troubled upbringing, a young man who'd lost his way. Emma listened to everything without expression, professional, fair, untouchable. When the defense finished, Emma spoke for the first time. This court recognizes that the defendant had significant privilege and resources that most people never access, yet those very advantages make his choices more, not less, culpable. He had every opportunity to choose differently. Alexander's lawyer started to object, but Emma continued. However, this is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Based on the evidence presented, she paused, and Marcus held his breath. This court finds overwhelming probable cause. The defendant will stand trial for vehicle manslaughter, DUI resulting in death, fleeing the scene of an accident, and attempted bribery of law enforcement officers. Bail is denied. Trial date set for 60 days from today. The gavel fell with finality. Alexander's face crumpled. His attorney protested.
The victim's family embraced, tears of relief streaming. Emma had given no special treatment, no bias, no mercy beyond what the law allowed. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus pushed through the crowd toward his daughters. "Emma! Sophia! Sarah, please!" They turned, 3 faces looking at him without anger, without hate, just profound, exhausting sadness. "Please," Marcus begged, his voice breaking. "Please let me talk to you. Let me explain."
Marcus fell to his knees in the courthouse hallway, a billionaire reduced to begging. But some apologies can't buy back time, and some wounds cut too deep for words to heal. The hallway buzzed with journalists and spectators, but Marcus saw only 3 faces. Sarah stood between their daughters like a shield, her hand gently resting on Emma's arm. "Please," Marcus repeated, his voice raw with desperation. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know what I did was unforgivable," Emma finished coldly. "Cruel, inhumane. Which word are you looking for, Marcus?" People slowed, watching the confrontation. Phones came out. Marcus didn't care anymore. He had nothing left to lose. "All of them," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I was a fool. I was blinded by pride, by this stupid idea that only a son could carry my legacy. I threw away everything that mattered for a fantasy." Sophia's jaw clenched. "You threw away your children, real, living children, for a gender preference." "I know!" Marcus's voice echoed through the marble corridor. "I know what I did, and I've lost everything because of it. My company, my wealth, my wife, none of it was real. The son I chose over you wasn't even mine. Victoria played me for a fool for 23 years. Everything I built is gone." "And you think we should feel sorry for you?" Emma asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think your financial ruin somehow makes up for the nights our mother cried herself to sleep? For the hunger? For wearing the same shoes until they had holes in them?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady but tired. "Marcus, I forgave you, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to that hatred was poisoning me. I gave you my blood to save your life, because that's who I choose to be." Marcus's face lit with desperate hope. "Then you understand. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation," Sarah continued. "It doesn't mean we're family again. It means I'm free from what you did to me. That's all." Emma stepped forward, her eyes hard as diamonds. "When we needed a father, you weren't there. When Mom worked 3 jobs and her hands bled from cleaning, you were throwing parties. When Sophia and I wore donated clothes to school and got bullied, you were buying Alexander sports cars." "You only want us now because you have nothing left," Sophia added. "Where were you when we won that academic competition, when we got into university, when we graduated top of our classes? You didn't care about us then because we were successful without you." Marcus reached out, but Emma stepped back. "You taught us a valuable lesson," Emma said. "You taught us that blood doesn't make family, choices do. And you chose to abandon us. Now we choose not to let you back in." "Girls, please," Marcus sobbed. "We're not your girls," Sophia said firmly. "We never were. You made sure of that." Sarah touched her daughter's shoulders gently. "Let's go home." They walked away, Sarah, Emma, and Sophia, leaving Marcus on his knees in the courthouse hallway surrounded by strangers and cameras, drowning in regrets that came 2 decades too late. 6 months ago, Marcus owned 50 rooms. Now he couldn't afford one. The mansion, his last monument to a wasted life, went on the market with a for sale sign that might as well have read Fallen Empire. The real estate agent walked through the mansion with potential buyers, her heels clicking on marble floors that Marcus had once walked like a king. Marcus sat in the kitchen, the only room with furniture left, signing papers with trembling hands. Everything else had been sold. The art collection, the vintage cars, the designer furniture, all auctioned off to pay debts Victoria had left behind in legal fees for a son who wasn't his. The property should sell quickly, the agent said with professional sympathy. Prime location, excellent bones. You'll clear about $12 million after mortgages and liens. $12 million from a billion-dollar empire. Marcus signed the final document. He had nowhere to go. 2 weeks later, Marcus moved into a small apartment in the part of the city he'd never visited, the part where Sarah had raised their daughters. Peeling paint, thin walls, neighbors who worked double shifts just to survive. He got a job. For the first time in 30 years, Marcus worked for someone else, managing inventory at a wholesale warehouse. The other employees didn't know who he was, didn't care about his former empire. He was just another aging man trying to make rent. Every night he came home to his tiny apartment and thought about Emma and Sophia. He'd seen news articles about Judge Martinez's fair rulings, about Dr. Martinez's volunteer work at free clinics in underserved communities. His daughters were changing the world, without him, despite him. He'd tried reaching out, letters returned unopened, calls blocked, messages ignored. Sarah had been kind enough to respond once. "Marcus, please stop. We've moved on. You should too." But how could he move on from the biggest mistake of his life? One evening, Marcus sat in a small diner, the kind of place he would have never entered in his previous life, eating a simple meal he'd budgeted for carefully. The television above the bar was showing the news. A familiar face appeared on screen. Judge Emma Martinez received recognition today for her groundbreaking work in family law reform, particularly focusing on protecting children's rights regardless of gender. Marcus watched, tears streaming down his face into his coffee. Then the report cut to footage of Dr. Sophia Martinez at a community health center. Dr. Martinez has donated thousands of hours to providing health care for families who can't afford it, inspired by her own mother's struggles. The diner patrons chatted and laughed, oblivious to the broken man in the corner booth, watching his daughters shine without him. The male heir he'd obsessed over was in prison. The wife he'd chosen was a ghost, spending his money somewhere tropical. The empire he'd built had crumbled to dust. But the daughters he'd thrown away, they had become everything he'd ever wanted in a legacy, just not in the form he'd been too blind to value. Marcus pulled out a worn photograph, the only thing he'd kept from the mansion. Sarah, pregnant, smiling at the camera, her hand on her belly where Emma and Sophia grew. He'd had everything, and he'd destroyed it with his own hands.
Years passed. Marcus grew old in his small apartment, working until his body gave out. The billionaire who'd wanted a son to carry his legacy, but the daughters he abandoned, they built an empire of compassion that would outlive them all. The final truth: Marcus spent his remaining years in that tiny apartment, surrounded by newspaper clippings of his daughter's achievements. Judge Emma Martinez became renowned for her fair, compassionate rulings, particularly in cases involving children and family rights. Dr. Sophia Martinez opened free clinics across the city, serving communities forgotten by everyone else. They never spoke to him again. Sarah remarried, a kind teacher who loved her for who she was, not what she could produce. She finally knew peace. Alexander served 15 years for vehicular manslaughter. Victoria was never found, living luxuriously in a country with no extradition treaty, spending Marcus's money without a second thought. But here's the cruelest irony. Marcus finally got his legacy, not through a son, not through an empire, but through 2 daughters he deemed worthless. Judge Emma Martinez's name appears in law books. Her reforms protect thousands of children from discrimination. Dr. Sophia Martinez's clinics have saved countless lives. Their mother, Sarah, is remembered as the woman who taught them that grace triumphs over bitterness. The Marcus name lives on, but only through the women he tried to erase. The billionaire who wanted a male heir to build monuments ended up with daughters who built legacies of justice and healing instead. They didn't carry his name proudly, they redeemed it despite him. This is what happens when you value tradition over humanity, when you choose pride over love, when you measure worth by gender instead of character. Marcus learned too late that the greatest legacy isn't what you leave, it's who you love while you're alive. So we ask you, what matters more, having the right heir or raising good humans? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have forgiven Marcus? Could you have shown the grace that Sarah did? Hit that subscribe button because we have more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, legacy, and redemption. Part 3? Let us know if you want to see what happened to Alexander in prison and whether Victoria ever faces justice. Your comments decide what we create next. Remember, the best revenge isn't cruelty. It's becoming so successful that their absence in your life becomes their loss, not yours. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next one.